I'm going to jump right in to welcome Nicola Maher to our event. I work at SILT. I'm an academic staff developer, and Nicola Maher are two colleagues of mine with whom we have worked for a very long time, and it's lovely to have both here at UCT presenting on critical AI literacies today for us. Maher is based in the Center for Learning and Teaching at the American University in Cairo. She has a PhD in education from the University of Sheffield and is a co-founder of Virtually Connecting, which is a grassroots movement that challenges academic gatekeeping at conferences. And she's also a co-facilitator of Equity Unbound, which is an equity-focused, open, connected, intercultural learning curriculum, which has also branched into academic community activities such as continuity with care, socially just academia, and a collaboration with One Higher Education, community building resources, and MyFest, an innovative 3-month professional learning journey, which she has started to offer, I think, for the last 2, and this is the 3rd year, really lovely workshops in June, July, and August. She writes and speaks frequently about social justice, critical pedagogy, and open and online education, and blogs regularly at blogmahabali.me. I'm going to put that in the chat. And Dr. Nicola Pallet works as an educational technology specialist and senior lecturer in the Center for Higher Education Research, Teaching and Learning at Rhodes. She supports academics to use technologies effectively for teaching and learning, supervises postgraduate students and co-teachers on formal courses and professional development offerings. Through her research, Nicola aims to expand critical perspectives on educational technologies in higher education. And I'm really happy to see you here in the room, and I'm going to hand over to you. You should be able to share your slides. Is it okay? Should I share them in the chat with colleagues, or you do it later?
Yeah, we were just about to put the QR code as well.
Perfect. Perfect. So the floor is yours.
Go ahead, Nicola. I'll start sharing and you talk. Oop, you're muted.
You're muted.
Rookie mistake. Sorry, guys. Yeah, it's so lovely to see so many familiar faces in the SALT meeting room and also in the participants list. A lot of colleagues from Rhodes and Stellenbosch, and just want to say welcome again. Lovely to have you here. So yeah, here are our details, and we're going to share a little bit about developing critical AI literacies, which is important for both educators and students alike. And we're going to unpack some of those dimensions. But first, we've got a really nice series of activities. So here's a link to our slides. But we're going to be using Mentimeter today, which is a tool a lot of you are probably familiar with already. And we've got some like icebreaker questions we'd like for you to engage with. All right, and the first one.
Just give me a second because Teams confuses me a little bit with the screen sharing. I need to stop so that I can share the Mentimeter. Okay. Well, just so you know, the first question is, how are you feeling? But I just need to get it up on on the screen. So take a good think about how you're feeling right now. Okay, here we go.
You may hear some pets at some point because I'm working from home. The birds gets a bit excited with the bell and the cat's moaning. And
so this is how you can join the Mentimeter. You can either take the QR code, not to be confused with the QR code for our slides, but the other one was blue. So you can either use this QR code or you can go on a browser to menti.com. And the code is 12952358. And for people who are actually on Teams, I think I should be able to share it in the chat. Oh, can't figure out how to get to the chat.
I've already done that now.
Okay, thank you. All right. And the code is still here if you still need it. So this in Arabic just says Assalamu alaikum in Arabic, just peace be upon you. And yeah, let us know how you're feeling. This will produce a word cloud of all the words. Curious, excited, grateful. Peaceful, alive, tired. Tired is getting bigger. Overwhelmed, enthusiastic, intrigued, energized, calm. Excited is also getting bigger. Community, interested, anxious. I'm sorry you're feeling anxious. You're seeing anything else? Oh, flu, you have a flu. I'm sorry you got a flu. Hope it goes quickly. Thrilled, daunted. I wish the Mentimeter would color these in a way that represented the feeling. Overwhelmed. Okay, shall we move on to the next question?
Yeah.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so we thought we'd also just ask, what is your level of familiarity with generative AI? So I teach, I research it, I know, understand it, but I don't teach it or research it. Intermediate, beginner, never used it. Just to get a feel for the room. Yeah, so we've got a lot of diversity. Quite a few beginner users. Some have never used it. We've got some intermediate users, some people who teach and research it. And I think it's really, I congratulate folks on saying I'm a beginner user, because that takes a lot of bravery.
And you'll see we don't have like I'm an expert, because I don't think at this point anybody's really an expert, even the people who code it. But you could be teaching and researching it, so you're still learning, but definitely more than just an intermediate user, I think. Okay, thank you all so much. So this tends to be, I think, the regular thing I get to see these days in different universities. All right. Then we want to know how you feel about the latest advances in generative AI. Just because someone is using it or not using it doesn't really tell us much about how you're feeling about it. So there's ambivalent. Update's always good. That's an interesting assertion. Concerned, vexed, curious, overwhelmed. I think it is overwhelming, even no matter who you are. I think it's a little bit overwhelming. Challenged, conflicted, cautious, scary, interested, not keeping up, hopeful, anxious, worried, optimistic. There's a big curious and excited, but also a big overwhelmed and cautious and anxious and interested. Are you seeing anything else, Nicola, that I'm not seeing?
Cautiously optimistic. I like that.
I'm also seeing uncertain and terrified and futuristic and fascinated and upside down. Yeah, and worried. All right. Okay. And there's, I think, one more, and then we're going to start talking a little bit more. So what's a metaphor for AI you would use? Like, my mom is a medical doctor and she's not involved in education or technology in any way, but she said that ChatGPT reminds her of fast food. So I'm curious what it reminds you of. So transformative, second brain. assistant. Twin personal assistant, so not just an assistant. Burning tires, quick, relevant. E.T. Oh, haven't heard that one in a while. Writing coach, robot, technology alive, disruptor, lazy writing, robot helper, express train, fast and furious, rainbow. Ooh, rainbow is a new one. Better Google. Sweet and sour. I like that one a lot. Jibber jabber. New dictionary. Translator. What else? Support. I'm curious about the rainbow metaphor. What do you think, Nicola? What do you think they meant by I'm
They
very
can tell us
curious.
more. Maybe in
Yeah.
the chat.
But if they're
Or
virtual,
reach-
how are we gonna? If they're in person, we won't be able to know. If the person who wrote Rainbow wants to tell us what they mean by that, I'm very curious. Convenience, shortcut. Smart kids. Untrustworthy. Unpredictable, but keen. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to take a screenshot of this and put it in our slides. So we've just been through this. And yeah. Okay, good. So we can keep this. When you keep the slides, you'll have this with you. And so I want to share with you a paper that I've worked on with others. It's called Assistant Parrot or Colonizing Loudspeaker, and it's centering on metaphors of ChatGPT and using those to develop critical AI literacies. And this image, by the way, is made with generative AI with DALL-E. And so the idea was to look at the ways metaphors of AI are being used in the media, in peer-reviewed articles, on social media, and to think about a lot of different dimensions. But the two most important dimensions we focused on was, is it anthropomorphizing? Is it treating AI as if it's human? I don't know why they made that word, but anyway, it's a difficult word. Just to mean, is it seeing it as a human? And also looking at Selber's multi-literacies framework to see if the metaphors look at AI in a functional, i.e. positive way, critical, i.e. negative way, or rhetorical, like seeing multiple perspectives on it. And so we made this diagram of all the different metaphors that we'd come across. And here's some of them. It's not all of them, but like, for example, a human metaphor that's positive, which a lot of you used, was assistant, right? Fahlawi is an Egyptian word to talk about a person who doesn't know what they're saying, but they'll respond as if they do know anyway. It's a little bit like a bullshitter, I think. So this is one that we made up. And then there's positive non-human metaphors like calculator or autocomplete. I don't think any of you use these two metaphors specifically, but there are things like train and things like that would be here. There's some that are negative use, like stochastic parrot. And these are semi-human, we say, because like a parrot is a live thing. It's not a machine. And then there's things like two-edged sword, which is a mixed view of AI. And then there are the negative non-human metaphors like fast food, plastic surgery, colonizing loudspeaker. So I want to go back and look at some of your metaphors and just comment on those. So things like helpful friend are positive, curious sister. I don't know, curious, I don't have any brothers or sisters. Is curious sister like a mixed metaphor or a negative one, Nicola, do you think?
Depends on the sister.
Depends on the sister. That's a good point. Second brain is definitely very positive, right? And human writing coach is very positive, right? So I think the metaphors reveal a lot about how we feel about something. Trying to see sweet and sour is maybe, I would say, a mixed one, right? You're seeing the good and the bad of it, maybe. The untrustworthy is a negative metaphor, for example, but there's a lot of these are quite positive, aren't they? Disruptor is could be good, could go either way. Disruptor, like, could be a good thing or a bad thing. Okay, so, and there's one that says clueless intern, which I think is kind of mixed in the sense that clueless interns eventually can learn and become better, but they're clueless in the beginning. So I think that one's kind of mixed. So there's another analogy that I like to use about AI, and I use this with my students. I use it with professors, and I'm curious about you all. And I'm going to, it's about cake. You know, who needs to make a cake from scratch? Who needs to bake it from, who bakes it from a box? And I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a minute, even though Teams doesn't like it when I do that. And I'm just curious, like, how many people actually bake from scratch? How many people are good at baking from scratch? A few people? All right. And then people who don't bake from scratch, do you sometimes bake from a box? If it's a really important occasion, do you bake it yourself?
Some
Or do you
nods
maybe
here
buy
in the
it from a
room.
shop? Different responses here in the room. Prefer from scratch in the chat. I'm seeing that. Oh, and someone responded about the rainbow, a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. I see, Glenda. Thanks for that. Okay. So what we're thinking is, if you're baking from scratch, this is when we want students to do something themselves and not use any support or AI or anything like that, right? And I always ask myself, is my course the course where they learn to bake from scratch? Or is my course like a cake decorating course? It's okay if they take the actual cake from a box and we're going to learn how to decorate. And someone saying scratch is more economical. And it's more economical, I think, if the ingredients, if high quality ingredients are available and the kinds of ingredients you need, like if you need to bake like gluten-free or whatever, then maybe they're not so cheap, but maybe you need to find them and you might not find those in a box. And there are instances where what we're teaching them actually how to organize a wedding. They're becoming wedding planners. So the cake is not the thing that they have to do from scratch. They need to do other things so they can buy the cake from a bakery. And I think we need to be clear with our students, because whenever we're asked to develop like guidelines for how to use AI, there's always a conflict, because people who are teaching English or teaching writing they're teaching the thing. They're teaching kids how to bake the cake, and they need students to be able to write without help. And then others who are teaching like the thesis in engineering, they don't really want to teach writing. They want the writing to just happen. But the main thing is not that. Also, Precious is saying the assessment and the learning objectives outcomes, and they both have advantages and disadvantages. Yeah, Odette, do you want to add some more on that, Odette, on the advantages and disadvantages of sort of when you're baking from scratch versus not? But yeah, in general, obviously, when you're baking from scratch, you have a lot more control. But also, do we teach all our students to bake from scratch in the first place? Or do we just give them an assignment to create a cake? And then some of them already know how to bake and some of them don't. And some of them have a good oven at home, and others, they share the oven with, I don't know, like all their roommates, for example, right? If they live in a dorm, is the oven even free for them to use and to bake the cake from scratch? Like, we need to think about all of these things and make that analogy with education. Does anyone have comments on this before we move on? And then Nicola, I think you're up next with the next. So I have an entire book chapter on the cake analogy and the kinds of responses I get from students and from educators on it. Odette is saying, do you always need to bake from scratch if your goal is learning to decorate? Exactly, yes. I agree with you. So we need to be really clear on what it is we're teaching and what's the thing that students really need to be able to do, so we can focus on what's the main outcome that they need to do without help. And then otherwise, I think letting them use artificial intelligence to do other things quicker is a better way to give them more time, I think, to do what matters. But we need to be clear on what matters is the thing. Okay, Nicola. Is the screen share working?
Yes, there we go. So before we get into the dimensions of critical AI literacies, we thought of using our kind of spectrum of participation based on our, and I mean myself, Maha, and Daniela, we've done some work on compassionate learning design. And we thought, well, what if we apply it to thinking about using AI in classrooms? And, you know, it's about learner choice versus educator choice and what it involves, various pedagogic strategies. And this, I mean, I think that the on the far left is where the educator has the most choice. So you decide which AI tool students can use, and perhaps you scaffold a particular use, and you decide on the criteria that you regard as appropriate use without any input from students or input about what AI tools they might be using already. So with the the educator has the most choice. An example of a pedagogic strategy would be where the educator models the use of a tool, decides on the question prompts, and shows the analysis of various outputs, and scaffolds those literacies through demonstration rather than allowing students to engage with it experientially. So, and then the 4 is a little bit different. This is where an educator might ask students which tools they're using already, and then inform, the tools that they, list of tools they could choose from. And perhaps the criteria are then decided by the educator in advance, but the tools are, agreed on by the students. So here you could still model as an educator the use of an AI tool, but also ask students to make suggestions and revisions to particular prompts, and just facilitate discussion around these. And then afterwards, you might want to set an individual or group task to scaffold particular AI literacies more experientially. Then in the middle is where you have a lot more student involvement, and here the educator and students openly share and discuss AI tools and different ways of using it, and decide what is appropriate use, so negotiating that together. And the educator can also decide, and invite students to make suggestions for revisions to criteria around AI use for assessments or class activities. So here, the educator and students are essentially collaborating on relevant tools and co-designing the criteria for an assessment brief or how to use AI in a course. Then BI is a lot more learner-driven and less educator. So it's also got to do with, I think, the maturity of students and what level of level of study they're at. So in first year, you might do a lot more 2, whereas postgrad, you might be on more towards the right of the spectrum. So with the BI, there's often already some familiarity with the various AI tools, and then students decide on the criteria for appropriate use, and lecturers might make these official in some form of submission brief, or use that to the students' criteria to inform it. And a pedagogic strategy would be where students use agreed criteria that they've done as part of perhaps a peer review task, and negotiate further revisions. Then on the far right, with the educator is not involved at all, and students establish and share strategies and their experiences of using AI tools to support their learning among each other, and they decide on criteria for appropriate use. And perhaps may, decide to include a reflection on their use of AI tools for a submission. And this often happens informally in study groups, and I think it doesn't mean that educators are completely uninvolved, but you could intentionally create spaces for interactions like this in formal curricula. So a lot of options here, and I think it really depends on this level of students that you're working with and their familiarity with AI tools, and you might move from a to a with within a course once you've established some practices and familiarity. Yeah, Maha, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add, it also depends on your own teaching philosophy and your own level of familiarity with AI and your comfort with uncertainty and ambiguity. So are you someone who needs to know AI very well before you can give students more agency? Or are you someone who's willing to learn along with students even when you don't know? And I think not all of us have the same level of comfort, and not all of our institutions actually give us that sense of safety if we want to experiment with something like that. And then sometimes people are teaching multi-section courses where there's so everybody's teaching, they have to teach the same way. So those are things that could complicate the amount of agency you can give students. But to whatever extent you can, I think it could be really useful. So was this me or you for this slide?
I think it was you, but it's okay. Yeah, we're just signaling that, AI is not a neutral technology. It's political. It can serve particular policy objectives, ideologies. So just bearing that in mind, as with a lot of other educational technologies.
Yeah.
And now we're going to, now we're going into the literacies.
Right. So very early on when generative AI became a thing, people started talking about things like AI literacy, and people then started like, what do people even mean when they say AI literacy? And so I usually talk about critical AI literacy because I'm looking at it from a critical perspective, as in, think about it critically, but also think about the social justice implications and the power implications of it. And so when I talk about AI literacy, this is what I mean. And I published this on the LSE Higher Ed blog. And so that's the version I'm sharing here. And it's, first of all, I think we and our learners need to understand how AI works. We need to recognize inequalities and biases and make sure that students are also seeing that. Examine the ethical issues, and the ethical issues are in the ways that AI is created rather than the biases it reproduces, And then students sort of need to understand also how to craft effective prompts if they're going to use AI so that they can see the limitations and the potential of it. And then this decision about appropriate use, and going back to what Nicola was just sharing, and this assessment of appropriate use could be something that institutions do, could be something that each individual educator does, or it could be something that we co-create with our learners.
Yeah, and I think we in the beginning, we saw there were a lot of beginners in the room, and I think this is where the critical AI literacies is like, I don't even want to go there. Some educators feel because I don't want to explain to students how it works. And I think that's where you don't have to know exactly all the ins and outs of how it works, but just there are a lot of good guidelines out there. I mean, we give in our guidelines for staff and also in the ones for students some basic language to understand how it works. And because I think we don't realize often that for some students, especially those who are not very tech savvy, the word chat, like chat GPT, sounds like you're chatting with a person. So I think that it's important to, at least if you're explaining to students how it works, or even understanding how it works for your own sort of critical AI literacies as a start, is the main thing is that knowing that you're engaging, these tools engage with a pre-trained database. So like ChatGPT, pre-trained transformer, and that this, that database can be skewed as well. It's not neutral, and that if it's a large language model, it's using information that is dominant, and that where there are patterns rather than necessarily always factually correct. And I think there's some nice activities that you can try out yourself or do with students, and use it in an experiential way to understand how some of these generative AI tools work. And one of them is Quick Draw. So Quick Draw gives you a couple of seconds to draw various objects. Some of them are neutral and some of them less so. And yeah, I doodled, it asked a garden hose, an ice cream, an alarm clock, a sailboat. So yeah, these are my doodles, what I was able to do in 10 seconds for each one. And then they say, well, go and visit the data, and you can have a look at some of the, there are 50 million drawings that other real people have done on the internet. So there's a whole database of these little sketches. And you can see one of them in the next slide. So what everyone else decided that, what does a whale look like? The various interpretations of a whale. This is generally a fun. The visual ones, I think people have a lot of fun with. Yeah. Maha, you want to use share about the?
Yeah, so the article that I wrote about critical AI literacy is actually called "Where are the Crescents in AI?" And one of the reasons is that if you're asked to draw a hospital on Quick Draw, it assumes that, how are you going to tell a hospital from a regular building? It assumes you're going to put a cross on it. That's how it knows it's a hospital. But actually in the Muslim world, we have crescents. But if you do that, it doesn't understand what the heck you're doing. So this is not because it was intentionally biased towards a Christian culture, but just that the majority of the data that it's been using is that the majority of the world has a cross on the hospitals. And so that's what it's learned. But what's interesting is that even if you play quick draw in Arabic, where the majority of Arabic speaking people are Muslim, it still expects you to have a cross. So it hasn't differentiated different parts of the world. It's not integrating this alternative view of the world. And then one of the other things that happens in the Arabic version of it, other than that it sometimes uses very weird Arabic, is that it asks you to draw an angel. And for the majority of Arabic speaking people who are Muslim, we're not supposed to depict angels in pictures at all. And so to be able to draw an angel, I drew what, like a halo and wings and whatever, like the Western perspective of what an angel is. And even though it actually says in Arabic here that I didn't get it right, but I actually did. That's another problem with the Arabic, that it messes up a lot of things. What I use here is so we're showing you how this network is learning what something is, but we're also showing students very quickly that it's also a little bit skewed and biased to certain worldviews because of the kind of data it gets exposed to. And then I show them other kinds of data where it actually can see more than one perspective. So for example, if you're asked to draw a nail, some of you will immediately think of the nail that you hit with a hammer, and some of you will think of like a fingernail or a toenail. It actually knows both because apparently half the people do it this way and half the people do it that way. So it sort of understands that both are possible. Another example is like a bat. Bat could be the flying mammal, or it could be like a baseball bat or a cricket bat or something like that. So when you translate these words into like Arabic, they're completely different words, right? So, a fingernail has a very different word than the nail that you hit with a hammer. So that's an interesting thing. So the majority of people probably use it in English as well. The other thing that I think once they've sort of understood, and we've understood a little bit about how neural networks learn and give us answers, examining the ethical issues is important. And that means that students have to be able to make informed choices about whether and which tools to use. Not all of the learning large language models are the same. Not all of the visual ones are the same. There are ones that do all kinds of other things. It's important for them to know that in the process of creating something like ChatGPT and DALL-E, they hired contract workers in Kenya to filter offensive content and violent content, and those people suffered from mental health challenges, and OpenAI, the company that did ChatGPT, did not support them through that, and they were underpaying them a lot. And so this is a lot of human and labor exploitation in order to create an AI that doesn't offend us, the end users. So it appears like it's very ethical in trying not to create offensive and violent content, but in the process of making it that way, a lot of people got hurt. The other thing is that sort of the copyright, intellectual property, those who artists have been complaining about the way visual AI is appropriating their work. And not only is it an issue in terms of financially, like those of us in the global South, copyright is already a pretty unjust law as it is. But I'm also thinking about sort of, especially for people who are librarians, just the flow of scholarship. Like you're getting information from ChatGPT and you have no idea where ChatGPT got it from. You don't know who said it, when they said it, in which context they said it. A lot of times you ask ChatGPT, where'd you get this from? It's like, I'm a large language model. I have lots of data. It's just synthesizing data, but we don't know like where it's coming from. So you can't trace the scholarly knowledge to its source. And then a lot of people are saying climate costs of training ChatGPT and similar models because they use up a lot of servers and data. So the cost to the environment is pretty high, and to water also. And then, of course, the way data gets collected and the privacy of the data and who's exploiting the use of data. And of course, in Europe, they're much more conscientious about these kinds of things than in the US, where a lot of these companies are based. And so some activities you can do with students here is get them to read the terms and conditions. This is something that almost nobody ever does. And then you're going to get to see in the fine print what's happening there. Encouraging debate in class about like, would you use this tool that does this thing? Or if you were one of the people whose content was used in this way, what do you think? And another one that I think, and there's an article linked in the slides, is to have students do speculative fiction. Sort of what's the utopian end of a utopian future of AI in like 10 years in your field, whatever your field is, economics, business, I don't know, engineering, whatever your field is, and what's the dystopian view. And so making sure that they can see both perspectives, and also to sort of think, do we have agency to control which direction AI takes? What can we do as individuals in the world right now? Nicola, were you doing this part?
I think you were carrying on with this one.
Okay, I'll do that. Okay. And then recognizing inequalities and biases in the output of AI. So I've sort of talked about this a little bit. I think they need to try it on something that's very close to their heart culturally. And in our parts of the world, the possibility that AI will make these mistakes is much higher because our cultures are not very well represented, like African and just anything non-Western, non-Northern culture is not going to be very well represented here. And sort of understanding how the training data results in that. Generally, even if they tried to include enough data from us, a lot of the data from our parts of the world are not available in formats that computers understand and process. And then, of course, there's a range of inequalities, and some things they've tried to sort of address, but not always. And sometimes Gemini, I think, in the process of trying to make their visual AI more representative, went the other way, and they were having like dark-skinned Nazis and very big problems like that. So that's an issue. There's also another kind of inequality is like who has access even to these kinds of technologies. So we know in our continent, there's a lot of people who don't even have access to electricity long enough to even have access to good internet. But like ChatGPT, when it first came out, officially Egypt didn't have access to it. You had to pretend to be in another country through VPN and use someone else's phone number to be able to have access to it. We have access to it now, but Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Hong Kong, several countries just for some reason the company didn't want us to have access when it first came out. And so one of the things that I think I do in class to help students understand about the sort of the bias in the output is, again, using AI, visual AI, to show them some culturally nuanced context. And one of the Okay, this is you, Nicola.
Yeah, so this was generated with the, ChatGPT 3.5, so the free version, and the one on the left is from February 2023, and the one on the right is from May this year, so this month. And if we look at, we had a prompt, write a short story about the history of Makhanda in the Eastern Cape. So it's the new name for Grahamstown. And it's just interesting, you can look at responses over time, but I think you can also, another activity is looking at responses across different platforms, get students to engage with the different outputs. I'm just going to share one here. There's a new, relatively new one that aims to be more inclusive. It's called Latimer, and it's more, how can I say? It's trained on diverse histories and inclusive voices. So that's what they claim for the platform. But going back to the history of Makhanda, so I don't expect you to read a lot here, but we get a very colonial kind of story being foregrounded versus other interpretations. The one on the right, we see the story became more refined and included a little bit more historical facts. The frontier wars are mentioned in the later version, and we can also, the newer one has more information about the warrior Makhanda that the town is named after. So it kind of became more refined over time, but it's useful to get students to see, whose narratives foregrounded, what are the interpretations that are dominant in the AI outputs. And as I mentioned, you could even look at it over across platforms. Could be an interesting activity.
This was a funny story that I shared with my students. I was prompting Gemini. Originally, Gemini used to add images, and now it doesn't do as much anymore. But it's getting images from the internet because Gemini belongs to Google, and it just searches the internet. It's not completely pre-trained. And I was asking it about Egyptian leaders, contemporary Egyptian leaders, and the first one is called Muhammad Ali, the one on the left. But when I asked it to put an image next to his achievements, it gave me Muhammad Ali, the boxer, the American boxer. So this was an example of how AI hallucinates. So it knows that there's a contemporary Egyptian leader called Muhammad Ali. He was the first in the contemporary era. And everything it said about Muhammad Ali was real. except the picture where it put the picture of the boxer. So that was interesting to see how the hallucination happens and how the conflation happens. Like you can sort of understand the illogical logic that it was using, you know. I think this was you, Nicola, no?
Doesn't matter. Yeah, and I think this has got to do with the voices that have been dominant in society for a long time. Why are the outputs and the responses, you know, inherently racist or ableist or sexist? And I think, you know, here, FOTU stands for. Let me check that again.
I think it's the full name. It was just capital by mistake, but it's the person's name.
Yeah.
Just like this is capitalized by mistake. So. This is, yeah, go ahead.
And it's very much around representations and how a lot of these generative AIs have, you know, data representations of their ways of knowing and being, losing agency. So there are a lot of debate in this around representation. So alternatively, not participating, and you know, what are the pros and cons? Or what if you don't participate? And not participating in the generative AI space will then continue to perpetuate Western-centric biases and systemic racism built into these existing algorithms, which I think is really nice. Like I shared Latimer in the chat, that we have these alternative platforms and generative AI tools popping up. Okay, so then one of our other, you know, the other dimensions of critical AI literacies is also crafting effective prompts. And some people, you know, you might have heard of prompt engineering, and engineering sounds quite scientific, whereas I think, you know, Maha talks about, you know, prompt, you know, crafting, which is a lot more creative and being iterative in how you refine generative AI prompts to improve the accuracy and effectiveness of various responses. So you can refine images. So for example, if you've ever used an image AI, a generative AI tool that generates images, you can actually refine your prompt and see if, you know, what you need to change to make it match the image that you want. And even with texts, you know, when you're using ChatGPT or Claude, you can refine your prompts and actually, you know, share reflections with others about what do you find. Like a colleague actually shared with me yesterday. He said, no, Claude's English it's much better at English. It's English sounds much smarter. So it's about the tool, but also about the different platforms. And there's a podcast recently about how the different platforms also seem to have personalities that are quite different. Yeah. And then assessing appropriate use. And here's a lovely little kind of decision diagram for students. And it's about knowing in which situations AI tools are appropriate to use and in which situations it would be problematic. And you can, for example, discuss this with students in class, perhaps model appropriate uses or assign class activities where students engage in comparative processes. And it's, you know, also about what is the focus and what are you gaining, but also what are you losing? So, you know, if someone uses an AI tool to write a response to a forum post, it's not it might not be genuine reflection. So, what are you losing by using an AI tool? Okay, I'm gonna hand over to you for this one, Maha.
Sure. And so someone could in their class or in their department say these are the permitted uses of AI, 1, 2, 3, 4. These are uses that require additional permission, and these are uses where AI is not permitted. Or you could go back to what Nicola was sharing earlier and then think about ways of giving students more agency over this. And I've discovered that sometimes within the same classroom, we're all doing the same assignment, but about different topics. And I ask students, try using AI and see if it helps you. And half the students will say, oh yeah, it helped me. And others will say, no, I didn't like what AI gave me and I'm going to do it on my own, because they also have different levels of expertise and different writing abilities. And so as long as it's not the cake, they're doing something, but the cake is not the point, it's okay for me to let them decide assignment by assignment whether they're going to use AI or not, and that not everybody in the class is going to use it. If they use it, they explain how, and if they don't use it, they say why they didn't use it, and that's it. But they've tried to see if it's going to be useful, and then they decide for themselves if they can do it better than the AI, or if the AI might be helpful for them. And so that's quite different than what everybody's doing. Like most people are doing this, where there's very clear on what's permitted and what's not. And I'm sort of shifting between all of these different layers depending on where each of my students feels they are more comfortable and works best for their purposes. So those are the different dimensions again. And just I'll skip over. I thought we were deleting this slide. But one of the key things in the assessing appropriate use is awareness about hallucinations, which we've sort of talked about. This is when the AI gives you completely wrong answer because it totally mixed up information, like giving you Muhammad Ali Clive from the US instead of the Egyptian Muhammad Ali, for example. Are we back to cake again? You were going to say something about cake, right?
Yes. So I thought, building on your cake analogy or metaphor, there's also something here around, general critical AI literacies, and then also more disciplinary approaches. So if we were to think, yes, you're building a cake is like AI, there's also something around, well, that cake might look different in different disciplines. So in one, it might not be a cake at all. It might be a milk tart. Or is it a celebratory, birthday cake? Is it not a cake at all? Is it a dessert or a brownie? So I think this is where we get to think a bit more about, what speaks to the disciplinary needs and outcomes, and perhaps the level of study that the students are at. So I'll share an example from a colleague that I interviewed from computer science, and there was in the honors class, students found code on GitHub, and they're like, oh, can I use this for my project? And they said, yeah, sure, and it's also very much part of the disciplinary culture to reuse open source stuff. And at honors level, that was considered totally fine. But if you're a first year student and you are learning how to write code, using a generative AI tool might be less effective because you're not necessarily learning the rules to write that code. So I think it depends. We've got to engage, I think, with disciplinary nuances, and there are articles popping up from different disciplines around what does appropriate use look like. Because I think every cake, if we think of the cakes in disciplines, they've all got their own, recipes or variations. And say you had to make chocolate brownies or a chocolate cake you've made the same way forever and ever, and you now got an air fryer. And you want to see, okay, now how do I make chocolate cake in an air fryer? You probably have to adapt your recipe. It might be smaller. And are you still, if you were assessing, are you still assessing that same thing as a chocolate cake? Or does it need to be a chocolate cake? Can it be a brownie? Just something to provoke some thinking there. And just that is like the next, how can I say? You get critical AI literacies, but then there's also a disciplinary slant to it that we're seeing. And if we just click to the next slide, please, Maha, this is just one example. So this is about AI literacy in journalism. Okay. So what does that mean? Reporting and transparency. The very got a very specific, they're specific things that I think journalism educators will need to consider. And some dimensions of critical AI literacy might be more important than others. Things around representation, factual correctness. Yes, please do. If you have any questions, share them in the chat. And there's also a book. Oh, I put that one later. Let me just move it around. No,
it's coming.
I'll do the next one first. And it's about, evaluative judgment. So I saw Glenda put in the chat earlier about don't we need fact checking on the diagram. So I think that relates to a broader thing that we see in higher education around, especially in work on assessment, the concept of evaluative judgment. So Ty and Bowd and Philip Dawson and colleagues, they all, they started writing about evaluative judgment as a student's capability to make decisions about the quality of their own work and that of others. And then they developed that a little bit further in this later 2024 paper to think about it in relation to AI and assessment, where students need to be able to develop evaluative judgment to assess generative AI outputs, but it's also about assessing processes. And then for lecturers, whether they're going to use generative AI tools to assess students' evaluative judgments and what the issues there. So it's a very thought-provoking article, and I just think if anyone's looking at kind of disciplinary specific critical AI literacies and taking it to the next level, engaging with evaluative judgment and what that means in the discipline and a particular level of study, that could be really useful as well. And here's the book that I mentioned. It's an open access book, and there are a lot of little cases from different disciplines.
And that has the cake analogy written out. There's a lot of longer chapters, and then there are short, case studies from teaching practice. All right, back to Mentimeter. So I know why I have a problem with Teams, because Teams, the thing is in the same place where I have to go to get out of the slide to go to another slide. So I have to unshare and then reshare. But we wanted to ask you all, from in your area of work, what is it and what is AI not so good at? And skip the what would you? Yeah, what is generative AI good at or good for in your discipline? It's the same Mentimeter code, but I can show it in case some of you closed it from before. I think you have 6 more minutes, so if you have questions, get them ready. But we wanted to collect from you what you consider to be good uses of AI in your discipline. Is this one difficult? Shall we go to what it's bad at? Okay, it's good at academic writing. Yes, it's like an academic writing assistant. Getting ideas and options and views and perspectives on a topic, idea generation and code generation correction, ideas brainstorming, planning essay structure. As a soundboard, as a critical friend, not as a source ever, yeah, should never be. Developing reference work for the creation of art, narration, storyboarding, second language writers, yeah. Education, quick information on different topics, link to resources. Not sure about the resources thing. Even the ones that give you real resources like Bing and Gemini, the resource they give you exists, but isn't necessarily saying what it says the source has. So that's kind of tricky. But there are some that are research tools that are a bit better than that. First draft of course design, curricula, persona development, refining writing, grammar, argument, editing, brainstorming, developing MCQ questions. That was the first thing my husband did. He's a professor of surgery. He made it develop MCQ questions. Assist with academic writing and ideas, getting conversation started, framework generating, correcting grammar. I'm interested in this framework generating. That sounds like a lot. Like that's different than outlining or Sounds like a lot to ask of AI to do. Helping with close reading to understand assignment prompts. Yeah. Rephrasing, double checking assumptions, brainstorming, outlines, structuring arguments, pulling themes from transcripts. We've done that one. We've done that one quite a lot. As long as you're giving it the data, but then I'm starting to think about ethics issues of giving it data. So that's something to think about. And their discipline, providing an overview of concepts to promote students' logical thinking sometimes. Okay, email thread summaries, yeah, because nobody wants to read all those emails. Creating structure to possible outlines for topics. Creating images, I love it with the creating images. Yeah, but that's the issue with the copyright with all that. Like with what you took and what you're creating, then who has the copyright for that, right? Giving alternatives, reducing word count doesn't always work, but yeah, Microsoft Word used to have this reducing word count type of thing like 10 years ago, and then they removed it. It's not part of Microsoft Word anymore, but you can do it with ChatGPT, definitely. Brainstorming ideas and checking and visualizing theoretical frameworks and case studies. You check papers, helping you figure out what you're saying. Do you think we should take a question? Because the next question is like, what's it bad for? But what's the key takeaway? And then we'll take questions. What's the most useful thing you've learned today? And then we'll take a couple of questions. And you can always email us later, right? If you have any more questions.
And perhaps feel free to also pop questions in the chat. Yeah, I think that's really useful, working with students to discover AI. And sometimes we feel overwhelmed, like the initial, how do we feel about this, or that you can't keep up, or that you don't like know enough to explain it to students. So you're not even going to bother doing, class activity. And it's that, being open to trying it together. Yeah. Yeah, understanding pedagogic goals. Interesting.
So I'm seeing that a lot of the people's takeaways are about experimenting and giving students agency and transparency, understanding the limitations and boundaries, contextual and cautious use. Oh, somebody's saying lots you hadn't thought about makes AI even more intimidating. Really? I feel like people usually feel less intimidated after these sessions, but okay. Okay. There's just one question, one point I wanted to read at the end of this. Still feel overwhelmed. Yeah, it's the tricky thing is that there's always new stuff with AI, so it's hard to get comfortable at any point. All right, we can take questions. Daniela, if people in the room want to ask, and if people online want to ask, like they can raise hands or they can ask it here. We only have like 1 minute
questions
left.
from the room? I see Haneli has a question around MCQ.
Okay.
She's asking, I'm curious how others feel. My experience has been that even the MCQ specific software possibly create very superficial questions with very obvious distractors.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think, but to be fair, so think about what it's trained on. The majority of MCQ questions in the world are bad. So it's just reproducing the badness of actual MCQ questions. I can see people laughing in the room. I mean, it's giving you what humans have been doing all this time, but I agree with you. And it can also make mistakes. Like the problem isn't just that it's reproducing that, it can actually can give you a wrong answer too.
Salita says it's a lovely session. She likes the cake analogy. Is there any questions in the room? I just see lots of smiling faces. No.
We need a part 2.
We need a part 2.
We need a part 2.
The disciplinary. That's
Okay.
really for me intriguing is to
Yeah.
think about.
Let
different
us know.
disciplines.
Let us know what people want for the part 2, and I
Mm.
think Nicola and I would be happy to. Go ahead, Nicola.
I
My
want to
Fest.
say- My Fest.
Yeah. My Fest is a
My
3-month-long part 2. All right, let me share this. Thank you, Nicola. You rock.
Emerge Africa also has an AI festival.
Oh yeah, how long though? Not 3
in
months though.
October? No. 2 weeks, I think. In October,
Okay. Yeah. So My Fest is, Daniela mentioned this in her intro, when she was introducing me, and it's a 3-month-long, and Nicola and Daniela tend to take part in it, as do many people from UCT. Sukaina Walji is one of the co-organizers, and we've been doing a lot of AI. Like for this coming June, July, August, we have at least 20 sessions on AI from different people from all over the world. And I'm trying to also make sure that we have a good representation of Africans working on AI, because we tend to look at things from quite a different perspective than folks from the West. And I'd like to share that back. So the registration isn't open yet, but you can express interest using bit.ly/myfest24. So maybe Daniela, if you could email to everyone who is here, that'd be easier. And we have a lot of resources, by the way, at the end of the slide deck. Nicola just put that in the chat again.
So I have a possibly unfair question, but there's a lot of pressure to teach literacy really quickly. What activities of the ones you listed sort of work well if one only has a short engagement? Because I know it's a very unfair question, but I was just curious from your experience, what ones were the most sort of engaging for your students?
I mean, it does depend on what you're trying to tell them exactly, what you're trying to share exactly, but the quick draw really helps them understand how AI works and shows the biases really quickly, and it takes about like 10 minutes to do it. And discussing metaphors and then unpacking metaphors of, oh, you're actually saying AI is like a calculator? Actually, it's not, because it's not accurate. Oh, you're saying AI is like so-and-so, and then we discuss the metaphors and how accurate they are, or if they make us misunderstand. And Nicola, you can talk about this one also. This is a good one.
Yeah, which face is real? Or was it called fake or real? Is one with
I think it's which face is real? Fake or I think which face is real. I know that one.
Yeah, it's all different faces, and you've got to say whether you think it's real or AI generated. And I actually shared it with my colleagues a while back, and they're like, "Oh, I only got this score. I actually got it wrong." And it's just trusting AI. If you want to bring home the point of being a little bit more skeptical around AI responses, that's a kind of fun, I think, a really fun activity.
I'm just showing it now. I remember that one. I didn't use it this semester, but it's a cool one. It builds off of another database that's actually called "This Space Does Not Exist." Oh, this person does not exist. And it's, a lot of the bot accounts are actually based on, which one of these do you think is real, Nicola?
Gosh. Let's say the one on the right.
On the right is real? You're wrong. It's hard. It's hard to get this right. Anyway.
Well, thank you so much, Nicola and Maha. It was lovely as always. Thank you for giving us your time. And yeah, hopefully this will be a continuous engagement and learning together. Thank you so much.